The new Honda Hornet was one of the most anticipated releases of 2023, and fans had high expectations. And after the release, the comments started to roll in. And there are a ton of Honda fans that had a lot to say about this new Honda Hornet. Aside from the engine no longer being a 4-cylinder, a lot of the negative comments focused on the looks of the new Honda Hornet. Folks think that it looks too much like the CB500, which it does share the exact same headlight as the CB500. So with all of these comments rolling in, I gave myself a challenge. Can I redesign the Honda Hornet? But first, a brief history. The Hornet was first released in 1998 and featured a 600cc inline 4-cylinder engine with telescopic front forks. The Hornet was updated in 2003, and in 2007 it received a full makeover. There was a final redesign in 2011, and in these last two versions we begin to see a bit of the insect-like or transformer-like aesthetic, which is seemingly present in the latest iteration. Which makes sense because, well, just watch this.
Elements of the design were inspired by the shape of the angriest insect, the hornet.
Of course it looks like a bug. That's what the inspiration is. Okay, so to be fair, I do think that the design story for the new Honda Hornet makes sense. And there are a couple of things that I would like to change aside from the headlight. To begin with, I think that this section here is a little too derivative of what KTM's doing. And it's actually not done as well as what KTM is doing either. So I'm going to try to address that right off the bat. And second, I would like to take some of this tail section and reference the original. The original had a much longer tail section that was really just simple and clean, and I think there's some of this length that we could add back to the new tail section of the Honda Hornet and maintain some of that reflection on heritage, but do it in a new way. And there are a few things that I'm not going to change. Honda's invested a ton of money into this new engine and chassis, and I think that the engine is going to be a great motor, so I'm going to leave those the way that they are. I'm also going to leave the low slung exhaust. On the original, it had a high slung exhaust, which I think looked really good, but when you're riding two up, we don't want our passengers to burn their thighs getting on or getting off, so I'm going to keep the exhaust where it is. I begin the process with a blank piece of paper. This is the most exciting and the most daunting moment in the design process. All of the questions are looming over you and no answers have been found at this point. But similar to how it is in life, if we just keep sketching, answers will begin to manifest. And after a few pages of sketching, I begin to hone in on a side view that has some potential. So I bring the image onto an iPad and begin working through the sketch in a 3/4 view. Working on an iPad is a quick way to loosely work through design ideas and begin painting in the color breaks. It's still pretty rough at this point, but certain elements around the tank are beginning to work. With all of these ideas coming together on paper and in my mind, I head to the Cintiq where I can begin crafting a final design image. I'm using an underlay of the current CB750, and I begin laying in line work over top of that image, and it's important to create crisp line work before laying in color, and I'm laying in section lines and really working through as much of the form as I can so that when I begin painting, I essentially can paint by numbers and have a very clear roadmap that I can follow. I generate a number of different headlight sections, but I'm still not happy with the overall look and design of the front end, so I start from scratch and take inspiration from the CB650 and start with that circular headlight that fans are asking for and go from there. And I think I get somewhere that begins to work. Here's the current CB750 and the reworked Hornet. Let's take a look at this design and understand how it relates back to the previous generations. We'll start by looking at the 98 model. So we've got a round headlight and we've got these dual gauges here. So what I've done is taken a look at the CB650 headlight, which is circular, used that, kind of flip it upside down, and included a projector style LED, similar to what you see in the MT-07, so it's a little bit smaller. And then looking at the gauges, I've broken them out into two main sections, which kind of references this dual gauge setup that you see in the 1998 version. And then also in the original, they had this really, as I mentioned before, nice tail section, which was quite simple. So what I've done here is taken this yellow part brake and just extended that a bit to capture some of the elegance that you see in the 98 model. I've also added these little form cutouts to reference the stripes of a bee, since that is the spirit animal for this bike. And next, let's take a look at the 2003 to 2005 version. And this bracket here is a pretty prominent portion of this front end. So I've added this aluminum piece, maybe it could be chrome, as a reference to this model year. One thing that's consistent across all of these model years is the tank silhouette. It's very much the same. So I've come through and modified this tank section to be a bit more reminiscent of the previous model year tank silhouettes, rather than the chunkier tank that you see in the latest redesign. And then looking at the 2007 redesign, a lot of just the general motion of this front end I've tried to capture with this redesigned front end here, to keep that same kind of movement, because this was a pretty big departure from what the Hornets had been doing in the years prior. And looking at the 2011 model, there's a pretty prominent emphasis on this radiator cover. So in redesigning the tank section to be more reminiscent of the previous model year shapes, I mean, they all kind of did this kick out then kick back in, so I've captured that shape, which has opened the door for this more dominant radiator cover. A lot of the cladding on the current design is, there's a lot going on, and it kind of references this insect structure, and that's all good and great, but I've taken a moment to just simplify some of these forms and just kind of clean that up while trying to maintain the mechanic or faceted aesthetic, but just reducing the amount of surface changes in things like this. Those are my thoughts on this redesign. If you're still here, subscribe, leave a like, drop a comment. What do you think? And I've also redesigned the 2023 Honda Transalp, which you can watch here. Talk to you later.